Well, heavy fighting is raging on the outskirts of Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, with the bulk of Russian forces now reportedly just 25 kilometres from the city centre. Humanitarian corridors are being set up in towns and villages outside the capital as fighting enters its 17th day. Roughly half of the city's population is already evacuated, with those who remain either preparing to defend the city or finding shelter. In the besieged southern city of Mariupol, civilians are enduring freezing temperatures with few supplies as evacuations continue despite sustained shelling. Meanwhile, the southeastern city of Volnovakha has been almost destroyed. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky remains defiant and says the capital will not fall.
If they kill us all to enter Kyiv, if that is their goal, then let them come. If they carry out carpet bombings and wipe off the historic memory of the entire region, the history of Kievan Rus, the history of Europe, they could enter Kyiv.
Now, Ukraine's foreign minister has again called on NATO to supply warplanes to help in its battle with Russian forces. While NATO has refused to impose a no-fly zone, Ukraine's foreign minister, Dmytro Kuleba, says a supply of fighter jets would help his country turn the tide against Russia.
If we had more planes, we would have been able to save many more human lives, mainly civilian lives, because the main striking force of Russia is in the air, and they indiscriminately choose to attack civilian infrastructure and kill our civilians.
The Black Sea port city of Odessa in southern Ukraine is bracing for an attack by Russian forces. The city is the country's largest port and is reportedly seen as strategically important by Russian forces. Civilians and soldiers have been sandbagging streets and securing many of the city's ancient buildings in preparation for the Russian advance.
Go Russian army. No girls.
They'll not get through.
Only back in Russia.
We already shown since 24th that we're holding back, and we kicked some ass, sorry.
The humanitarian crisis caused by the war in Ukraine is worsening as refugees continue to flee into neighbouring European countries. Poland's parliament has passed emergency legislation that allows Ukrainian refugees the right to work in the country for 18 months. Germany has also announced plans to take thousands of refugees from neighbouring Moldova. More than 1.6 million people have fled Ukraine since the war began. We're turning back now to our top story, and as the Russian invasion of Ukraine enters its 17th day, thousands of residents in the city of Melitopol have protested against the abduction of the local mayor by Russian forces. Our Europe correspondent Steve Kinane joins us now for more on this. Steve, what's been the reaction to this alleged kidnapping?
Well, Joe, I think it's fair to say widespread anger. At least 2,000 residents protested in the streets today, which you can imagine took a lot of courage given there are Russian forces throughout those streets. And as they walked through the streets, they were chanting, "Free the mayor." Now, this was after this CCTV vision was released by Ukrainian officials. They claim it shows the mayor, Ivan Fedorov, being marched away from Victory Square in the city on Friday. You can see those Russian forces, and apparently he had a plastic bag over his head at the time as well. Now, Mr. Fedorov had previously stated his administration would not cooperate with the invading forces in any way. And we heard from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky today. He described it as a crime against democracy. Here's a little bit more of what he had to say today.
I am grateful to every Melitopol resident for this resistance, for this position. The invaders must see they are strangers on our land, on all our land of Ukraine, and they will never be accepted. Throughout the night and today, we constantly talk to our partners about this situation with our mayor. The demand is simple: to release him from captivity immediately.
And that was a pretty long statement President Zelensky gave to the Ukrainian people today. He also talked a bit about how Russia was what he believed torturing the citizens of another city in Ukraine as well, Mariupol, where they've been under siege for at least 12 days. They've been cut off from water, they've been cut off from electricity, increasingly food, and all this while that city has been shelled. And officials say at least 1,500 people have been killed by the shelling and the blockade in Mariupol. And of course, President Putin knows the awful effect that sieges can have on civilians. His 2-year-old brother died in the siege of Leningrad during World War II, and he spoke about that to a journalist in the US a couple of years ago. So he could stop this siege right now if he wanted to, but he's choosing not to, and more civilians will die as a result.
And meanwhile, Steve, the French and German leaders have spoken with Vladimir Putin. Were there any developments from those talks?
Not really. This was a three-way phone call. And so you had Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor, you had Emmanuel Macron, the French president, talking to President Putin for around about 90 minutes. And they brought up the mayor as well, the alleged abduction of the mayor. But they also talked about how critical it was that there be a ceasefire before any meaningful negotiations can happen for an end to this war. Interestingly, the French readout of that call suggested that Vladimir Putin is not willing at all at the moment to stop this war. And when you look at the Kremlin's readout of the call, they don't mention ceasefires at all. What they do is they make claims that the Ukrainian people are using civilians as human shields. So there was not much hope coming out of that 90-minute conversation between Olaf Scholz, President Putin, and President Macron. But I guess the only hope is that those channels of communication are still open.
Yep, indeed. All right, Steve Kinane there in London. Thank you.